Welcome to Samso Insights. We're here today at the UWA Club here in Crawley. We're going to bring you a story on uranium mining and nuclear energy. What's the difference? It's with Cauldron Energy. Jonathan Fisher, CEO. Cauldron Energy is ASX listed with the code CXU. Current market cap is 47 million, thereabouts. So Jonathan, you've been doing a lot of media stuff, and that's how I caught you. And
Yep.
I thought this is the guy that we need to talk to get ourselves familiar with uranium mining, not nuclear power, not nuclear reactors, but uranium mining is kind of like, I feel, and rightly or wrongly, that it's the next energy that we need to have. So just before we start, can you just give us a brief of yourself, the journey to CXU, sorry.
Well, Perth born and bred. Actually went to uni here, although it looked a bit different in my day. I did a commerce degree and law degree here before going to work in Perth. Like many, young bucks, went across to London for a few years, and in London I ended up in the nuclear advisory team at Rothschild, and so we became I was a member of the leading nuclear advisory team. Did basically every major nuclear deal there was. Look, frankly, because our boss was actually a nuclear physicist who built Hinkley in the UK. So whenever you walked into a pitch as an investment bank, we won every time. So I ended up in London for a while doing that, and then came back to Australia after the first baby was born, kind of trying to slow down. And one of the things I did, I ended up, not a lot of people know this, but ended up getting approved and built Australia's first radioactive waste repository, and that's in WA. It's just out of Kalgoorlie, a couple hundred clicks out of Cal. We got that approved by the McGowan Labor government, but by Labor government at a time when uranium mining is banned. And it's interesting because that facility, the way we're able to sort of get that through their thinking is it is an enabler for future industry. So if you have a world's best practice place to put kind of nasty stuff, then you can encourage industry to come and build. And it's exactly what's happened with the lithium plants. Is those lithium hydroxide plants, they've got some nasty stuff in them. It's more chemically hazardous than radioactive, but this facility takes all that as well, and it helps the state out. So I'm really proud of the fact that it's the only asset in the Southern Hemisphere like this. It is a bloody good asset. And it's relevant for uranium mining because it people know that there is this world's best practice place to put something, if you need to.
It's interesting because that's kind of like what most of the hoo-ha is about with the uranium mining or the thought of nuclear energy, is that what you're going to do with this waste.
Yeah.
But you've got a waste facility already in place.
Yeah, so uranium mining, right, so we'll only produce what you call low-level rad waste. So it's not nuclear waste, doesn't come from the nuclear fuel enrichment cycle. And the interesting thing about uranium mining waste is, so we're mining the radioactivity, we want it. We take that rad and we sell it. So the tailings that we're putting back into the ground are less radioactive than they were, right? The difference with like mineral sands mining in WA, and our mineral sands over here are actually frankly much more radioactive than they are over east. They're taking out the mineral sands, but the rad stream stays in the waste stream. So you're not reducing any of your radiation. In fact, the tailings on mineral sands are probably more radioactive than tailings from uranium mining. The other, I mean, you touched on nuclear waste. Yeah, that's a motive issue. The industry has a PR problem on that. The fact is, if we just switch to nuclear industry and nuclear waste for a sec, waste is actually the strongest point, probably one of the strongest points of nuclear generation, right? You have you have per megawatt hour, you have a lot less waste from nuclear than you actually do from renewables. When what people call waste, being spent fuel rods, comes out the back of a reactor, they actually still contain about 95% of their energy. The industry calls it reprocess it into new fuel. You know what, we should just call it recycle, because everyone knows what recycle means. You can actually recycle that material, use it again. And contrary to what, and this is embarrassing, but contrary to what it says on The Simpsons, nuclear waste is not green, it's not sludgy, right? It's black and hard. The reason I bring that up is it's interesting. A few 6 months ago, Senator Canavan tried to put forward a private member's bill to remove the ban on nuclear energy in Australia. That bill failed, and then the Labor government put forward a bill to remove the ban on nuclear energy in Australia for the purposes of submarine propulsion only. This is our AUKUS thing. So theirs got through. But Senator Canavan's was interesting because what the government did is spend a few months gathering all sorts of reasons why not to remove the ban. So you could see all the reasons, they're all ridiculous. But what they showed is that the main source, one of the main sources that Aussies get on the nuclear industry, their main source is The Simpsons, right? So, if that is your fact checking, well, the industry's got a little bit of a PR issue that they need to work a bit harder on.
It's interesting because when you talked about the nuclear waste not being a sludge and being a hard thing, I mean, that's the impression, that's the thought I had, and I'm pretty and that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Is that people got this image of the waste sludge is going to flow everywhere.
Yeah, and look, it doesn't actually get in the water table. But there's actually been sort of research on this, and The Simpsons comes from the States, right? But it hasn't had the same impact in the sort of collective psyche in the States because they've actually got a nuclear industry, right? They do see the benefits of the industry. They do interact with it. They've also obviously got, military nuclear submarines and stuff like that. In Australia, we haven't. And so, if you're not living and interacting with a certain industry or technology, you're going to go out and find your information from some of these other sources, and The Simpsons has been one of them. It's, I make a joke that The Simpsons has done for the nuclear industry in Australia what Borat did for Kazakhstan. Right, he's destroyed tourism. I mean, it's a very unfortunate thing, and we've, we shouldn't focus too much on nuclear, but the industry needs to get better at educating, the electorates. Yeah.
So, John, in terms of what our discussion is today, I'm thinking that we should. I mean, you mentioned it off camera before the start. There is a difference between uranium. The way we should look at uranium mining, which is what Cauldron and the rest of your associates are trying to do.
Yeah.
It's not creating a nuclear reactor.
Correct.
Therefore, the circumstances of what you are doing as well is very different to what a nuclear reactor would produce in terms of what it needs and what's the waste. Can you just quickly, I know we've just kind of touched on it, but specifically say, if the process of uranium mining is this.
So, I mean, the process of uranium mining, and you look at you've got to remember in Australia, we produce uranium. We mine it in South Australia quite happily for 40 years, very profitably. You look at a uranium mine, they look like any other mine. There's a process plant. In Australia, we will process to the point of what's called yellow cake, which then gets shipped overseas. It will go through a conversion process and an enrichment process, and then it will get made into fuel rods, and those fuel rods will then go into civilian reactors. Importantly, and this gives me this really riles me up. People who are worried about can we handle radiation in WA, or do we have a nuclear capability within Australia? People don't realise that Australia's actually got a really well-respected nuclear industry. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think that, but we've got ARPAN's our federal regulator. We've got ASNO, our agency responsible for anti-proliferation. We've got ANSTO, our research institute, who runs what's called the Opal reactor. And Opal, people don't know this, Opal supplies around 30% and up to 50% of the world's supply of what's called Mo-99. So if you've ever had a relative that's had cancer treatment, or if you've had to have nuclear medicine scans where they inject you with some stuff and then scan you, that has come from ANSTO. Australia exports that around the world, and our regulatory and framework and capability is extremely well respected. So when people say, oh, we don't have the capabilities, absolute garbage. We need to grow in size that capability, yes, but the framework and the building blocks are already there. Same thing in WA with respect to how do we handle low-level radioactive material from mining, because that's all it is. It's a radioactive tailings stream from a mine, which we already handle with mineral sands, tailing streams radioactive, and various streams from the oil and gas industry. So we have these frameworks, we have radiation safety cases, we have radiation safety officers who are on site. We know how to do all this. Yes, we've got to increase the scale of the amount of skilled resources, which we're going to have to do anyways, because we're going to have nuclear submarines in WA pretty soon. So all these arguments that say we can't do it is absolute. What it is people trying to dress up ideology and justify it using other means. And they do that because generally Australians don't like ideological big statements and everything. And that's why you see Chris Bowen all over the media claiming nuclear energy is expensive, right? He doesn't claim it's a leftist ideology and therefore we don't want to do it. So he tries to dress it up in economics because he knows that will sell better to the electorate. In reality, it's an ideological stance by Labor.
Yeah, I got a sense of what we have when I was at the ANU for a rare earth conference, and they said, "Oh, we got this nuclear, this kind of new department," and I brushed it off because.
They've just opened a new one.
And I was just
brilliant.
But that's the sophistication we're at, right? In terms of levels of what we have, even in a university, and not a big nuclear institution. You want to put it that way.
Yeah.
But what I really want to get at is, and I think a lot of people who are negative towards uranium mining, is that they think this radiation thing is gonna, as soon as you drill a hole, you're walking over it. We're going to contaminate the land and things. And what they don't realize is there are a lot of commodities that are associated with radioactivity already.
Yep.
So just, if you can, give them like a layman's kind of thing. You walk up, you drill a hole, or take a rock chip sample or something, and then is there that fear, of...
Right, yeah. So... The ore, so the in situ ore, is not particularly radioactive. It does not pose a threat to, human health, from periodic exposure. Our finished product, obviously, being yellow cake. Now, even yellow cake is actually not that radioactive because you haven't gone through a conversion and enrichment process to enrich the U235 instead of the U238. I won't get into it, but there's different types of U, and you want the radioactive portion. So even yellow cake is not particularly worrisome. It is a powdered product, so it is produced in a sealed, bagged, occupational health and safety, absolutely all good environment. But the processing risks on U mining are no different, honestly, than many of the other commodities that we produce, by either mineral sands, vanadium, is a heavy processing thing. There are think about even when we do gold processing, right? There's cyanides and arsenics and all stuff. You know, we've been working in this country for the last 50 years to bring our health and safety standards up. We are the world leader in health and safety in the mining industry. You know, TRIFR, total recordable injury frequency rates, everything way down to just absolutely the best in the world. You know, the issues that, say, the unions in WA would say, oh, you can't mine uranium safely. You know, it's the next asbestos. That's what one of the unions' policy is. It's the state secretary says that. You're like, I think you're kind of stuck in occupational health and safety land of 50 years ago. You know, we wouldn't mine asbestos today the way it was done back then. Absolutely not. But nor would we mine uranium in an unsafe way either.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, when my first job as an exploration geologist was 1992, and I would say probably 80 to 90% of stuff that we used to get up to, you couldn't do today.
Yeah.
Right? Just wouldn't happen. So we've progressed a lot of long way from that part of the world, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of companies like Cauldron, where you're trying to mine, how do you see the path going forward? You know, with the discussion that we've had, obviously.
Yeah.
How do you see that path?
So let's focus on this state issue, right, about this ban. So it's important for everyone to know that the status of uranium mining in WA has sort of traded back and forth between Labor and Liberal for the last 20 years. So Labor governments ban it, Liberals unban it. Ban, unban. Everyone you talk to says this policy will change, just what time does it change? And there is a view that given the whole massive nuclear renaissance going on around the world now, and this desperate need for uranium from geopolitically aligned jurisdictions, there's a view that this time, when it changes back again, unlikely for Labor to be able to then go and ban it again, because there is just this undeniable momentum to needing, first world uranium, right? So how do you do that? Well, the Libs have come out and said they are running on a pro-uranium platform. Super. So tick that box. If state Libs manage to, pull off a remarkable turnaround and win the state election, great for our industry, frankly. Look, the second option is it is not out of the ballpark that the Labor government is forced to act actually even before an election. Now, why do I say that? Because after growing and being just absolutely on a tear with respect to mining employment and mining investment over the last 20 years, there's a few tailwinds in the mining sector in WA, headwinds, in the mining sector in WA, being nickel is very problematic, and we're seeing hundreds of job losses a week at the moment, but that could go into thousands and thousands a week. Lithium is trading sideways, and I think Albemarle even yesterday announced another couple hundred job losses down at Kemerton. And iron ore, which has been the absolute backbone of this economy, there's now a new mine called Simandou, which is under construction in Guinea. Simandou's nickname is the Pilbara Killer, right? Because it is very big and extremely high grade. It won't push Pilbara iron ore out of the market because Pilbara iron ore is sort of the bottom of the cost curve. But what it will do is displace a whole lot of higher cost production in global iron ore. And what that's going to do is decrease the marginal cost and decrease the price of iron ore quite substantially. And so, that won't necessarily hit majors' jobs as much. It will a little bit, but it's going to crash the iron ore price, and suddenly, the state's coffers royalties are not looking so healthy. So there is a scenario where, hey, assuming BHP closes Nickel West, that lithium trades sideways and iron ore might hit $70 a tonne later this year, and all the associated issues with it, is that enough to spur a Labor government which doesn't really want to have a fight with its left, but they might have to ensure that there's a new industry with lots of jobs that can help fill the gap? So that's possible. and the next question is, well, if Labor does win that at next election, all those factors I've just talked about there get more pronounced next year. And, you know, I would say that there's a process that the Premier is currently going through now to change the gas export ban. So in 2017, when the uranium ban was brought in, there was an gas export ban from onshore gas projects for WA. He's changing that now through a parliamentary inquiry process. So do an inquiry, hear lots of stuff, change the law. That same process can be run for uranium. And what's interesting is, with that gas ban, the rationale that the Premier himself is using to say, yeah, we need to sell more gas, is he admits that there is a moral obligation on WA to help our trading partners decarbonise. So if we sell them gas, they'll burn less coal, and that's good for the environment, right? So when you're talking about coal to gas substitution, you might save about 50% of emissions, right? Not bad. But that same argument applies to uranium, coal to uranium, and that substitution, you're saving like 99.99% of emissions. It's way better. And so I found it very interesting that the Premier chose to use that rationale in, frankly, having a fight with his left to change a gas ban, because the left didn't want it, but he is. And that leaves that same argument open for uranium, obviously, a bit later. Do one of these at a time.
I think the uranium question of whether it will be less emission, I mean, I remember this back to 2010 when I started delving into this whole world, is that the carbon footprint is more cost effective, it will generate more baseload power, consistent power. All this is a known fact. It's not a new thing it's not a new kid on the block.
Yeah.
The question now for Australia is economics, right? And I think that's what you're trying to say is, at the end of the day, if you're going to lose, let's say, nickel sulfide industry in Australia is got to be
bit problematic.
Big problem. I mean, we and it alludes to the point why it's a problematic issue. It's problematic because of all the things we talked about, how good the health and safety is, the cost, and our cost has just gone up and up and the opportunity cost of that is that you become less competitive.
Well, and in nickel you're competing against Indonesian nickel laterite, which doesn't have all those.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think at some point in time, I really don't feel that's a good thing, a good place to be, I should say. I agree with you, lithium too. I mean, $70,000 for a car or $30,000 for a car, it's a no-brainer for the average Joe.
Yeah.
The guys who can afford it, they can have the luxury, right? So economics could be the driver. And
well, yeah, job security, royalty diversification of the state, and the Premier, the Labor Party is half pregnant on nuclear uranium generally, and they're split between the left and the right. The right of the Labor Party doesn't mind uranium or nuclear. Left does, and that's when you're looking at Labor that has this crisis of confidence, because in inner city areas, Labor is worried about losing their left to the Green vote, right? And that's been played out around Australia. Is Labor's tradition, left goes Green, and so they're at pains to say, but we're still doing all these great lefty policies, hence uranium nuclear ban. But the right of their party, which is actually bigger by number, right? They want jobs. They want to be able to pay their mortgages, and buy their jet skis and their big utes and all good stuff. So the right's going to have an argument with the left. Jobs, ideology. Jobs a win.
do you think in some ways that the Greens, because obviously we associate the Greens with anti-uranium mining, do you think they're doing a big disjustice in not understanding the facts or the reality of the facts?
So I've released some polling on this. I sit on the Uranium Forum for Minerals Council, so we're able to do some polling. It's great. What we showed is look, no surprise, over 50% of Liberal voters want this policy changed, right? What was a bit of a surprise, over 50% of Labor voters want policy change. More surprising, 34% of Greens voters want the uranium mining policy changed, right? So what that suggests...
In favour of...
Yeah, they want to mine it, yeah. So that's still a minority of Greens, but it's a pretty big chunk. And what that suggests is that there's a Greens movement developing in Australia which you'd call eco-modernism, which is a sort of a concept that's come out of Europe where they say, yeah, the real enemy is carbon and technology can help us reduce that. And so you know, you've had Greens in Europe and in Canada switch their policy settings from being anti-nuclear to being pro-nuclear because they know that carbon's the real enemy. And maybe we're starting to see that in Australia, except Australia's just 20 years behind the rest of the world on some stuff, so you know it's a bit earlier in its infancy. Yeah.
Ever thought of a role in politics yourself?
So, my dad actually ran for pre-selection many years ago.
I hear the Liberals are looking for candidates.
So the old man ran for pre-selection for Tangi, I believe it was, for Federal Libs. He didn't get in, but he did have some kind of, you know, service kind of bent to him. Yeah.
That's not an answer.
Not for me. Look, I think I can add some pretty good value in Cauldron.
Oh, look,
Get
at
this
the end
policy
of the day, I
changed.
think politics is one avenue, but the driving comes not from the politician, from the likes of yourself, to drive that push towards, you know, pro mining or just giving the facts. I mean, there's a lot of facts that we're talking about here today that I'm pretty sure a lot of viewers out there would the Simpsons one would be a classic one, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone's...
Yeah, and I'd ask you viewers, like, be honest with yourselves. Did you think nuclear waste was green and glowy, and was it because of the Simpsons? Because I ask all my friends that, and they reluctantly. And you know what? I'm the same, because when we grew up, there was no nuclear industry here. I watched the Simpsons. Honestly, before I got involved in the industry, yes, I thought that too. And it's amazing how pervasive that is.
Because one of the key things, and you make that point, and I kind of like now look hooked onto it, is that every time we talk about uranium mining, the word nuclear is synonymous with it.
Yeah.
It's like nuclear mining, you
Yeah.
know, not uranium mining, and they're two very distinct things. What you use it for and how the process. We're only talking about mining it at this point in time.
Yeah.
And we're not really talking about all the other stuff.
Yeah, so I was on Talkback Radio last week, and then the lady after me to sort of give the rebuttal was from the Conservation Council or Climate Council, whatever, a left-wing organisation. And, you know, she started firing up about how we have a moral obligation to provide life cycle. So if we dig something out of the ground, we have to be prepared to put it back in the ground here, right? And you know, my response was, I think we've got a moral obligation to help the world decarbonise by providing them uranium that they are desperate for. But on that whole life cycle stewardship issue, it's really interesting because that's not the way any commodity industry works. You know, do we take back our scrap steel when we sold them iron ore, or nickel, or any commodity? It's not the way it works. When we sell people uranium and they are desperate for Australian uranium, they are well aware of the storage and disposal activities that they need to undertake, and from the licence conditions, it's those licence operators of plants who have that obligation. So they're aware of it. However, if you then said, from some strange construct that ended up being a time when we were forced to take back anything we delivered, you know, it's interesting because the Australian government, the Labor government, under AUKUS, has already agreed to put a high-level nuclear waste repository in Australia, because we have to take the nuclear waste from those submarines, and it's our obligation to deal with that, right? So the thought is it will be sited somewhere in South Australia. There was a site that was going to get up. Unfortunately, that was not knocked down in the federal court on a technicality. But anyways, there will be one, and Labor has committed to that. So what's interesting there is if you're talking, and so I built a radioactive waste repository, right? Bear in mind, when you're talking about that kind of thing, whether or not you build a repository that can handle waste from 12 submarines, or a repository that can handle waste from 12 submarines and maybe an Olympic-sized swimming pool, which would be kind of, that's a huge amount of nuclear waste. There's not too much difference in cost, because you've already made the commitment to build the facility in the first place, and the costs are in the licensing, and obviously the social licensing and the community involvement and community incentives, all sorts of stuff. It's kind of largely a fixed cost, and so if in the future where this these greens were triumphant and there was full life cycle analysis, we actually could quite easily do that. There is obviously that's a long-term community, consultation and social license issue, but it's that is not a reason to actually shut down the industry. It's just another one of these kind of quite hollow arguments that the anti-nuclear brigade will try on, thinking we don't have an answer for it, and we do.
So give us a visualization of the size of this waste depository for, let's say, a nuclear reactor.
So,
how much waste are we talking about?
So there are some really good stats out of there. So, for a person, an individual, Noel, if you powered your life and all your energy requirements for your entire life, the nuclear waste that you would generate as an individual is about half the size of your coffee cup, compared to about 100 tonnes of coal. That is quite amazing. Secondly, your half-size coffee cup, I already told you, actually still retains 95% of its energy. So it could be recycled. So it's not actually waste. The waste of, the current thesis on that kind of waste storage is you store it, but you store it in a manner where you can get it back, because reprocessing, recycling technology is getting better, and it's like any recycling technology, as commodity price increases, well, actually recycling becomes more economically attractive because the commodity price is higher. So it's a real opportunity, is reprocessing of that kind of waste. Versus when you look at renewables being, say, solar and wind, recycling solar panels is tricky. The waste generated out of renewables on a per megawatt hour is vastly in excess of nuclear, and it's actually quite nasty stuff. It's actually carcinogenic, and it's got heavy metals in it, and a lot of it goes to landfill. Not only is there very, very little waste generated from nuclear, there's what is people and the sort of the anti-nuclear sort of blindly pro renewables crowd won't admit is the waste problem that there will be in renewables. And I should say, I am not anti-renewables. I think we should have a technology agnostic solution. We need all sorts of stuff to get to net zero, and the important thing is let's get to net zero. Let's not try and get to net zero with one arm tied behind our back.
So for the investors out there who's just watched this and goes, yes, uranium is it, I'm going to be in there. Right?
Yep.
And they're looking at cauldron or other types of cauldron. What kind of time frame, people who are in, let's say, WA projects, or where you need this policy change.
Yep.
What are they looking at in terms of time frame? Obviously, it's a moving beast, I understand, and everything else. Are we talking about I should put my money in today and look at it in 5 years' time?
Well, I'd say you should do that. So people should understand that, so we're barreling ahead right now on our project. This policy does not stop us doing what we need to do now. So we're out drilling in about a month, 4 weeks. I've just got to recommission a camp. Funnily enough, it's recommissioning the camp as opposed to getting the drill rig that is the trickier thing at the moment. Drill rigs everywhere in WA. So we're tearing ahead, massively increasing our resource. We've delivered a scoping study. We'll be able to deliver a feasibility study. So there's a couple of years of work that we still need to do. So, you know, and there's going to be very good value accretion off the back of that work. You know, so you know, it would be nice to have the policy change as soon as possible, but it's not actually necessary for us to keep pushing forward on the project. And that's important because there are some jurisdictions where you can't even explore for uranium. But WA's quirky kind of regime, it's not a legislative ban, it's a policy ban of the Labor Party. So it does mean you can still do a whole lot of stuff.
I think if you know, being holistic and prophetic in terms of this industry, I'm probably going to get lots of greenies going to be standing outside my house and after this video. But being prophetic in things like that, I mean, the sentiment, I feel anyway, the sentiment of pro mining is getting stronger over the years. I feel like it could happen anytime.
Yep.
But the whole, and again, it comes back to this, the whole commodity mining, exploration mining kind of process. As you say, it does take that time anyway, right? So in kind of way, you know this policy most likely would change. 3 years time, you're probably at that point where you go, okay, let's start looking at mining. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think you've seen, I'm very active so I am basically the public face of getting this policy change, right? I'm spending a lot of time with all sorts of different people in and around the government and bureaucracy. We're going to get this policy changed. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm certainly encouraged by progress so far.
We're talking state WA policy.
So you know, there's certainly no better time out of the last 7 years than now to get, because of all these economic drivers we talked about nickel and lithium and iron ore. There is no better time now. The one caveat on that is there is this little bit of confusion in electors' minds, as we've talked about uranium mining versus nuclear energy. And while I do believe that nuclear energy should be considered as part of Australia's future generation mix, so I would support Mr. Dutton's proposed policy, it's probably not that helpful that he's having that discussion now while we're trying to change the uranium mining ban, because people conflate the issues and they get confused and mixed up. And therefore I'm answering questions about, you know, nuclear waste when I say, no, uranium mining does not create nuclear waste. But Dutton says, and I'm like, yes, but we're not talking about generation. We're talking about mining uranium, selling it overseas, just like we do iron ore and nickel and copper and everything else. So I think it's the right policy to have federally. It's just a little bit of a worry that there might be some confusion. And when you overlay that we talked about, the politicians are not professors. They don't always get that messaging spot on. And then you have politicians like our beloved Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, who take every opportunity and don't mind using some extremely misleading information to sort of cause alarm and generate that fire under the anti-nuclear team. So, yeah, I am working hard to make sure that we separate those issues. It probably, you know, it would have been easier if we didn't have to worry about that.
Look, we could talk about this forever.
We could. I would.
And I think it's really important to differentiate between what we're talking about is the policy change for mining it, as opposed to the nuclear reactor and all that kind of stuff. And I'm agreeing with you. You know, I do think I'm pro all this, but people need to understand, right, that tailings dam of other commodities do hang around a long time. They more prone to it breaking than what you're talking about, because you can imagine the administrative issues that you would have to go through to make sure that doesn't happen. And I'm not saying every tailings dam break, but they do
Yeah.
happen, and
Yep.
that's only because they haven't done it properly, or you get a big issue. But it is the same thing, and it wasn't the end of the world when the tailings dam broke, right? Which
Yes,
is
we're not talking about doing anything that is not already done in the state
Correct,
and is not already very well regulated, very well understood, and that Australia is, and WA particularly, is seen as the best in the world in mining. I mean, we are a mining state. That's what we do. No reason why we cannot dominate the uranium space as well.
all right. It's fantastic.
Cool.
It's great to get you here. I think my aim wasn't to be selling uranium mining, but I thought it's really good to bring it out to the public and have it explained, discussed, and I'm sure you'll be happy to get lots of questions.
Yeah, so I'm very open. I am the most approachable CEO on the ASX. So my personal phone number and my email address are on every one of our announcements. People can email and call me. I will respond. And you're right. Look, there is a whole chunk of the electorate that don't even realise that we live in, they assume that WA is the mining capital of the world. They don't even realise there's a uranium mining ban. So having these conversations, getting people out there to understand that there is this issue, and you know what? Either they should vote for someone who will, help fix it, or speak to your local Labor member and just let you know that, hey, yeah, I'm a Labor voter, but on this issue, I think you got it wrong. So that's the way we change policy.
And they should tell these guys to watch Samso Insights, because John got this perfect pitch, and you should watch it and educate yourself.
Boom, done.
Okay, look, thank you, and let's end it there, and hope we can catch up again and get an update on
Sure.
that whole journey that you guys are going, and thank you.
Good. Thanks, mate.